The Setagaya family murder. December 30th, 2000. Setagaya, Tokyo. The house stood at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, nestled against the border of a public park. It was an unusual place. Half of the homes in the area had already been abandoned, the land slowly being reclaimed for a park expansion. The Miyazawa family remained, their two-story home standing in eerie solitude, flanked only by the ghosts of empty residences. Inside, the air was warm. The scent of a late dinner still lingered, faint traces of soy sauce and miso blending with the winter chill that seeped through the walls. The lights glowed softly. It was supposed to be a peaceful night. In the upstairs bedroom, 8-year-old Niina Miyazawa lay sprawled across her bed, a book still open in her hands. Her younger brother, 6-year-old Rei, was in his own room, tucked beneath his blankets. He never spoke much, his speech delay made his world quiet, but he found comfort in the presence of his family. Their parents, Mikio and Yasuko, were in the living room. Mikio, 44, a devoted father and diligent ad executive, was finishing some work on his computer. Yasuko, 41, a caring mother and teacher, had just put away the dishes. Outside, the streets were empty. The world was silent. Then came the first sound. A click. A door opening. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. And then, nothing. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint scratching of Mikio's mouse against the desk. The killer was already inside. It's uncertain how he entered, whether through an unlocked window, the sliding door, or if he had been watching long enough to know exactly how to slip inside without a sound. But by the time he was inside, his presence was a shadow lurking in the corners of the house. He didn't rush. He watched. And when he struck, he did so with ruthless precision. Mikio was the first to hear it, a disturbance, a shift in the air. He turned from his computer, eyes narrowing in confusion. Maybe it was a creak of the floorboards, or the faintest whisper of fabric brushing against the wall. And then, the attack. The blade flashed. A deep slash across his body. Blood sprayed against the desk, against the wall, against the glowing screen. Mikio gasped, staggering backward, his hand instinctively reaching for his side. But the attacker didn't stop. Another slash. Another stab. Mikio collapsed. The room was filled with the scent of copper, the sound of labored breathing. The killer stepped over his body. He wasn't finished. Blood soaked the floor. The rhythmic clicking of Mikio Miyazawa's computer mouse had stopped. His breathing had faded to silence. But the killer wasn't finished. He turned, his steps eerily calm as he moved toward the staircase. The second floor awaited, where Yasuko, Niina, and little Rei still slept, unaware of the horror unfolding below. As he ascended, the old wooden steps barely creaked. He knew how to move. He wasn't rushing. He was methodical. Then, Yasuko stirred. A mother's instincts are powerful. Perhaps it was an unfamiliar sound, the shift of air, or some unexplainable sense of danger that forced her awake. She rose from the futon, blinking in the dim light. And then, she saw him. A dark figure at the top of the stairs. Her breath caught in her throat. The metallic glint of a knife. The dark clothing. The unreadable face of a man who did not belong in her home. Yasuko didn't scream, there was no time. The intruder lunged. The blade sliced through the air, striking her in a flash of brutal force. A desperate struggle followed. Yasuko fought, stumbling backward, but the killer was relentless. The knife plunged again, deep, merciless. Her hands grasped at nothing, blood spreading across her nightclothes. Niina woke to the chaos. She saw her mother collapse. Saw the shadowed figure looming over her. Her heart pounded. Terror unlike anything she had ever known. She grabbed at Yasuko's body, shaking her, her small hands covered in red. "Mommy?" Her voice barely above a whisper. The killer turned. A child. A witness. Niina tried to run. But there was nowhere to go. He caught her. The knife came down again. And then again. And again. The final blow, delivered with horrifying cruelty, was one of pure overkill. Niina was left crumpled beside her mother, her young life extinguished in an act of inexplicable brutality. Only Rei remained. Rei Miyazawa had been asleep through it all. The chaos. The screams. The violence. The little boy, just 6 years old, never spoke much. His speech disorder kept his world quiet. But as the killer entered his room, stepping toward his small, sleeping form, there was no need for words. A single action sealed his fate. The killer didn't use the knife this time. Instead, he strangled the boy with his bare hands. Perhaps it was to silence him. Perhaps it was because he couldn't fight back. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because even a monster like this man couldn't bring himself to watch the boy bleed. When it was over, the house fell into a deep, suffocating silence. But the most unsettling part? The killer didn't leave. The Miyazawa family was dead. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, had become a scene of unspeakable horror. Blood painted the walls, the floors, a massacre in a place that should have been safe. But what happened next is what truly baffled investigators and terrified Japan. The killer didn't flee. He stayed. For hours. As if he belonged there. Sometime after he ended the lives of Mikio, Yasuko, Niina, and little Rei, the murderer made himself comfortable. He walked through the blood-stained rooms with eerie ease, leaving footprints behind as if the scene didn't disturb him. Then, he did something unthinkable. He opened the family's refrigerator. He took out some ice cream and sat down to eat. Amid the carnage, amid the lifeless bodies of the family he had just slaughtered, he casually ate their food. Then, he rummaged through their drawers. Not to steal, but as if he was simply looking for something, he took out family documents. Dumped them on the floor. He accessed Mikio's computer. Twice, as if checking something, he used the bathroom, leaving traces of his waste behind. And then, he changed his clothes. He left behind his own outfit, a black sweater, a hip bag, a scarf, discarded like trash, soaked in the blood of the Miyazawas. Then, he took fresh clothing from their drawers and put them on. He was comfortable in their home. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He lingered. At some point, perhaps in the early hours of December 31st, the killer finally decided to leave. But he didn't cover his tracks. He didn't even lock the door behind him. He left behind bloody footprints, fingerprints on the computer, fridge, and bathroom, his own clothes, soaked in blood, a knife from the Miyazawa's own kitchen, which he had used for the killings, and yet, despite all this evidence, he was never found. The next day, New Year's Eve, 2000, a phone rang in Setagaya. It was Yasuko's mother. She had been trying to reach the family since the previous night. No answer. Unusual, her unease deepened. By the morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She decided to go to the house herself. She arrived at the Miyazawa residence, knocking on the door. Silence. Then, she tried the door handle. It was unlocked. She stepped inside. And froze. The first thing she saw was blood. So much blood. Then, her son-in-law, Mikio, collapsed in the hallway. Lifeless, terror gripped her. She rushed upstairs, calling for her daughter, her grandchildren, and then she saw them. Yasuko. Niina. Little Rei. Gone. Her screams shattered the cold December air. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police arrived within hours. They had never seen anything quite like this. A family slaughtered. A killer who lingered for hours. A house filled with evidence, yet no suspect. They combed through the scene. Every room held clues, bloody footprints, matching size 28.5 centimeters sneakers, an uncommon size in Japan. Foreign DNA, indicating mixed Asian and European ancestry. An abandoned outfit, possibly purchased in South Korea. A hip bag, holding sand particles traced back to the Mojave Desert, USA. But who was he? And why did he do it? Despite all this, the killer vanished into the night, leaving only questions behind. The crime scene should have made this an easy case. The killer had left behind more evidence than most murderers ever would. DNA, clothing, fingerprints, footprints, and even his own blood. But in the days following the Setagaya massacre, investigators realized something chilling. None of it led anywhere. The killer, despite leaving everything but his name, had simply vanished into thin air. Tokyo Metropolitan Police scoured the crime scene. They analyzed everything he had left behind. The murderer had discarded his outfit at the crime scene: a black Uniqlo sweater, a scarf, gloves, a hip bag. But here's what made it strange: the clothing was traced back to stores in Japan and South Korea. One item, a sweater, had been mass-produced, making it impossible to track a specific buyer. The footprints, the killer's shoes, were also a mystery. They were Slazenger sneakers, size 28.5 centimeters, an uncommon size in Japan. Even stranger? This exact shoe model had never been sold in Japan. It was likely imported from South Korea. The DNA and fingerprints. Forensic teams collected the killer's DNA from bloodstains he left on a bandage found in the house. But when they tested it, they found something surprising. The DNA suggested mixed ancestry. He had East Asian and European lineage, possibly Korean, Chinese, or Central Asian, with some Mediterranean genetic markers. The fingerprints were also clear, but they didn't match anyone in any database. The killer had never been arrested in Japan or anywhere else. The sand from his bag inside the hip bag he left behind. Police found something bizarre: traces of sand that forensic testing linked to California's Mojave Desert. This meant the killer had possibly traveled to the U.S., or at least had items from someone who had. This added a whole new layer of confusion. Was he a foreigner living in Japan? A traveler who had visited multiple countries? Or someone who had ties to international locations? Despite all these leads, nothing led to an identity. The case was a puzzle with too many missing pieces. The theories and questions were: was it personal? One of the first theories was that this was a targeted attack. Did the killer know the Miyazawas? There were no signs of forced entry, meaning the killer either found a way inside quietly or was let in. Mikio Miyazawa had recently been involved in disputes with local authorities over the park expansion. Could it have been connected? Investigators couldn't find any evidence that linked Mikio's disagreements to the crime. Was GE a professional assassin? Another theory suggested a hired killer or a professional hitman. But his behavior didn't fit. A contract killer wouldn't stay in the house for hours after the crime, eat food from the victim's fridge, use their computer, leave behind personal evidence. This wasn't the work of a professional. Was he a random stranger? Then came one of the most terrifying theories: what if it was completely random? A drifter, a transient, or a mentally unstable individual who simply decided to strike. This could explain his lack of urgency in leaving, strange, erratic behavior, failure to cover his tracks. But then, where did he go? Over the years, the Setagaya family murder has remained one of Japan's most infamous unsolved crimes. Every few years, new leads emerge. In 2015, investigators re-examined the DNA evidence, but still, no match. In 2019, police released new digital reconstructions of what the killer might look like. In 2022, Tokyo police issued a fresh nationwide appeal for information. Over 250,000 officers have worked on the case. More than 16,000 tips have been investigated. Yet, he remains a ghost. The Miyazawa house remained untouched for years after the crime. It became a dark legend in Setagaya, a house frozen in time, filled with echoes of the past. Locals refused to walk near it at night. Some claim to feel a presence lingering inside. But the true horror isn't ghosts, it's the fact that a killer, someone who left behind everything but a name, is still out there. Somewhere, watching and waiting. The Setagaya family murder is a chilling reminder that even with all the evidence in the world, sometimes justice never comes. A man walked into a family's home one winter night. He destroyed everything. And then? He disappeared. Maybe he's still in Japan. Maybe he's long gone. Maybe he's dead. Or maybe he's still watching, knowing he got away with it. And that's the scariest part of all.